Good morning. This is the duly noticed meeting of the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers of the great city and town and county of Nantucket. Happy New Year, everybody. We have a quorum, and it is made up, according to my notes, Kathy Bird, Scott Ulm, Gary Beller, Michael Cody, Peter Kahn, Lou Bisano, Don Green, Donna Martino, Lynn Filipski, Steve Hurlman, Bill Gardner, and myself.
Also Gary Beller and Jean Briskman.
I thought I'd mentioned Gary.
You did.
Okay, and then
So
Jean
Jean, I
Briskman
didn't
just
mention
joined.
Jean, though. Yeah, I didn't mention Jean. Okay. So then that's.
How could you forget me, Peter?
It's impossible. I just didn't see you. Out of sight, out of mind.
So everybody except Pam right now.
Sounds like my wife.
Yeah, good. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor,
Aye.
raise their hand. Aye.
Aye.
Good. Okay, and do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any dissents? No, none. Okay, so that's approved. So we're we're down to the meat of the meeting. Our guest speaker, Rob Rennie. Rob, as I think everybody knows, has I think appeared before us maybe 3-4 years ago, and he's the Nantucket representative on the Steamship Authority, a lifeline for the island, a very important thing, and a operation that has been met with additional challenges over the last couple of years. And what I was hoping is that we would get a sort of Rob's views on how things are going and what still needs to be addressed, and then have time for people to ask him questions. So Rob, are you ready, willing, and able to proceed?
I am. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. What I'm going to do is give a brief history of the Steamship Authority, how we came to where we are now, and then some challenges, as was mentioned, that we are facing, and how we are looking going forward. So I don't know if anyone remembers, but about 100 years ago, the boats were owned and operated by railroad companies. There were no interstate highways as we know them today, and people generally traveled by railroad. And then when they got to the end of the railroad, they got on a boat to come here or to Martha's Vineyard. After World War II, that all began to change. And people traveled more in vehicles in their own personal cars, and railroads focused more on freight as opposed to carrying passengers. The problem became that without the railroad's ownership and financial support and subsidies for the boats struggled to make money, because as is the case today, most of the money is made during the summer season. In the off season, other boat lines would pack up and go away because there were no profits to be made. So what that did was schedules became less and less frequent, or sort of sporadic in the off season, and there was a very sort of constant competition during the summer months to attract travelers to your particular boat line, and to try to make money to either get you through the winter or to pack up and go away. So the state, there were a lot of complaints because service was sort of irregular and unreliable. So the state stepped in 1948 and created the first version of the Steamship Authority, which it was similar to what it is today, but it had some problems. There was a lot of debt. There were some strikes that took place, some work strikes that threatened service even during the summer. And people generally were not happy. So the state stepped in again in 1960 and redesigned the steamship to more or less what you see today. The state's legislative framers of the Steamship Authority felt that the users of the boat line should be the ones who paid for it through the setting of fares and licensing fees from other operators, and that the people who were most affected by the Steamship Authority should also be the ones for its oversight and how it's run. It was a hard sell at the time to get any support from other parts of the state to help pay for it, because as was noted by several representatives from Western Massachusetts, why should we have to help pay for it when we don't use it, our people don't use it, and that's ridiculous. Populations were a lot less back then than they are today, and that was okay at the time because the service model was more reduced than it is today as well. But in order to guarantee reliable year-round service, the state also granted the Steamship Authority a monopoly, which ensured that at the very least, adequate service levels would be provided even during times when the service was unprofitable. With this monopoly came the ability to control the market in a way that allowed the SSA to make enough profit during the seasonal summer months to carry it through the unprofitable off season when other carriers were not running. With the SSA practically guaranteed to cover its budget and thus protecting the public need for regular service, service levels based on public need above and beyond what the steamship was required to provide under its balanced budget. Those public needs were then available for other market participants or private operators to step in and operate with a license granted by the Steamship Authority. This model of the Steamship Authority is unique in the country, but has worked very well here for over 6 decades. But to be clear, the Steamship Authority is a state transportation agency or authority. It is not a private company, but it is run with the oversight of appointed members from the public, such as myself. The Steamship Authority is made up of 5 board members representing each of the authority's member or port communities. Each board member not only has a duty to serve their community and their own constituents' interests, but they also must work together diplomatically to ensure that the SSA operates as efficiently as possible as a whole. If the boat line runs a deficit, each member community would then be responsible for their share of the deficit based on their share of the vote. There is a weighted vote on the board. Nantucket has a 35% vote, as does Martha's Vineyard. The other port communities, Barnstable, Falmouth, and New Bedford, each have a 10% vote. So theoretically, with the weighted votes, the islands should get what is in their best interests, but that is not always the case. Especially, there are differences between what Nantucket's needs and interests are and what the Vineyard's needs and interests are. And sometimes what is good for Nantucket isn't necessarily good for everybody else. So there are frequent compromises to make sure that everything operates as it should. So despite being a state transportation authority, the Steamship Authority does not receive any state or federal operational or capital subsidies of any kind. The steamship can apply for and occasionally does receive grants for certain projects or specific items. But other than that, the Steamship Authority is entirely supported by revenue from fares, which include parking revenues and licensing fees. Management is keenly aware that any expenses will ultimately have an impact on fares and thus ridership. And this has led to some common public misconceptions over the years, namely that the SSA is too penny wise and pound foolish, or that the Steamship Authority prioritizes frugality over general improvements or even wage increases. But unfortunately, as we all know, maintenance, fuel, wages, along with healthcare and other personnel associated costs never seem to get any cheaper. So fare increases will likely always be necessary without any other outside support. My role on the board, I'm appointed by the Nantucket County Commissioners for a 3-year term. And anybody can apply. It's open to any resident of Nantucket. My function basically is to represent the interests of Nantucket in all Steamship Authority matters. I do not work for the SSA, but I do have a fiduciary responsibility to the SSA and to see that it operates as efficiently financially as possible. I am uncompensated. This role is not compensated at all. So that is often a question I get. You know, why do you do this? You must make a lot of money to hear all these complaints all the time. Well, no, it's uncompensated. I have this role in my function. I have little to no say in the day-to-day operations, other than from a general policy perspective. I can and do help solve daily problems and issues, but mostly by putting people in touch with those within the SSA who can best help with their particular situation. I cannot magically get reservations on sold-out boats, not even for myself. I cannot bump anyone to the front of the standby line, and I cannot uncancel a canceled trip, unfortunately. So there are a lot of current projects going on, which I'll touch on here. The SSA, anyone who's been to Woods Hole lately, we don't necessarily go there as much as we used to, because the boats used to go from here to Woods Hole before they went to Hyannis. The entire Woods Hole terminal is in the process of being completely reconstructed, from the slips to the terminal building itself to the staging areas for the vehicles. The waterside portion of that, all the slips have been completely rebuilt in the last few years. And what's left now is a new terminal building and the staging area, which hopefully will be complete in the next 18 months to 2 years. After that project is done, the next terminal on the maintenance schedule is the Nantucket terminal. So within the next probably 5 to 10 years, there is going to be a lot of activity going on with regards to the Nantucket terminal. Some of the concerns there that are already being brought up and addressed are coastal resiliency-based issues, how best to possibly reconfigure the terminal to meet, modern transportation issues. There are a lot of things that come over on barges now. Trucks are bigger than they used to be. The Nantucket terminal was rebuilt in the mid-1980s and has basically been the same since that time. So there are things that could be improved, which hopefully will be incorporated in the new terminal, but that's still a few years off. There are a lot of IT enhancements behind the scenes mostly, but the steamship is working on a redesign, a refresh, and an updating of the authority's website. That is become a very expensive and complicated endeavor, but that is ongoing, along with the reservations system, which is separate from the website, and that is also being updated, but that again has become a very complicated and expensive proposition. As anyone can understand, the reservation system for the Steamship Authority is not as simple as one car, one truck, on the boat, off the boat. There are vehicles of all different sizes, trucks of different lengths. All of those have different fares involved. There are passenger issues. So it is very complicated behind the scenes, but that is in the works as well. New vessels. So from initial design to finished construction, a new vessel can take 3 years from start to finish to design and build. Vessels generally are expected to have a design life of approximately 50 years. The motor vessel Nantucket, which is running on our route right now, is 50 years old in 2024. The motor vessel Eagle, which comes back in about a week or so, and primarily runs on the Nantucket route, turned 37 years old in 2024. the Steamship Authority's newest vessel, the MV Woods Hole, will turn 9 years old in 2025. So these things age, we all take them for granted, but they age pretty quickly. Again, this is a challenge. To build a brand new Eagle or perhaps an enclosed new version of the Woods Hole would cost about $75 million in today's money. So the steamship recently went out and acquired 3 offshore supply vessels from the oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico. One of them has been modernized and converted into use for our service. And that will go online on the Nantucket route beginning in about a week or so, I believe. All of these 3 vessels, between acquiring them and making the modifications to them for our service, combined, the 3 end up being about 40 or 45 million. So we've gotten 3 relatively brand new vessels for less than half the cost of one brand new one. So these are good vessels. They are all identical to each other. So for training purposes, for spare parts purposes, maintenance purposes, these are efficiencies that the Steamship Authority has never seen before because we've never had exactly identical vessels. So I think these are going to be great for us going forward. We'll see how that works out this summer with one of them on our route. They are a little bit bigger. The truck drivers that I've spoken to are very excited about them. There are no obstructions on the freight deck. They're going to be very easy to load and offload, and so this is going to be good. Challenges, and there are many. So I'm sure I've forgotten some, but the big one over the last summer was crewing and staffing challenges. This is an industry-wide problem. It is not only a steamship problem. The issue that the steamship had was a lack of crew, which forced one of the scheduled vessels on our route to have to be used on the Vineyard route, which the substitute vessel was smaller. So we saw about a 10% reduction in capacity on our route, which led to a lot of other challenges as far as shifting vehicles around from trip to trip to try to get people on board. There were a lot of standbys as a result of that. Eventually, I think most everybody got across one way or the other, but it was a challenging season. Part of the crewing challenges are retirements. There are a lot of older crew members that are still working for the Steamship Authority who are approaching retirement age. Replacing them is a challenge, even from within. It is not easy to work your way up to a pilot or a captain. It takes time. You have a Coast Guard required amount of sea time that you have to put in. So you have to be on the vessel working for a number of hours before you can even start taking tests to get licensed for this. It takes time. And, people being people, sometimes people change their minds and they don't want to continue on with the program. So, you could have a really good sort of farm system of people coming up, and then somebody decides, well, I don't want to do that anymore, or, I want to go work somewhere else. So there are constant challenges with that. And it's hard. These are jobs that people fill that we expect them to, dedicate their lives to serving us, but that's not always, the case. Word of mouth says that new graduates from maritime universities or maritime academies are not necessarily looking to start their careers at a ferry operator like the Steamship Authority. They want to go out in the world on a cargo ship, perhaps, or a cruise ship or something like that, see the world, do all those things before maybe eventually settling down to a career, driving back and forth to Hyannis on the steamship. So it's not as easy as recruiting people directly out of maritime academies either, because there is also the competition with other operators who are all trying to do the same thing. This is a system, a industry-wide problem, which some of the experts are saying it may not get better. So that is certainly a challenge. And of course, wages are a challenge. As I touched on before, wages are part of the bottom line, and any increase to budgetary considerations would have to come from fares. So there's a limit on how much you can go up. With keeping fares fair to people, no pun intended. There are still some lingering COVID-19 challenges. One of the big ones is concessions. The concessions on the boats are operated by a contracted vendor that is not affiliated directly with the Steamship Authority. And they faced a lot of challenges during COVID-19 as far as staffing. One of the challenges on our route is, in order to provide concessions on the last boat over from Hyannis and the first one off Nantucket in the morning, those concession people have to spend the night. And they're at one point, the concession company lost their housing on Nantucket. So those people had nowhere to stay overnight. So the last boat concessions and the first morning concessions were discontinued. So that is another challenge that we face.
Can't get it back on.
There's often also, as everybody knows, a competition for limited space on the boats. Sorry, I'm getting a feedback from somebody.
Can everybody mute?
I'm sorry, everybody should be muted except for Rob, and then we'll have questions.
Yeah, I'm almost done. Don't worry. As we know, there's a competition for the limited space on boats. Boats only hold so many vehicles. There are only so many trips during the day. During the summertime, all of those are full. They're all running at capacity, more or less. But don't let that scare you off. People change reservations from trip to trip all the time. So if you see a boat, today that is sold out on July 15th, get on the wait list. The wait list will, if a space opens up, the system will automatically put you in that spot and send you an email and say your reservation has changed, and here you go. Here's your trip. Trucks change boats all the time. Personal people on their vehicles change all the time. Often what is booked now is not necessarily what the person wants anyway. So it's possible that a number of people will change and things will open up. Let me see. So there are some financial challenges. The Steamship Authority right now has about $130 million a year budget. The financial model is working, even though the SSA is only profitable for about 5 or 6 months of the year. The rest of the year, it's losing money. And if there is any profit at the end of the year, that goes toward paying down debt, potentially towards new vessels or other capital projects. But with the increasingly higher and higher costs of these capital projects, such as for new vessels and infrastructure replacements, budgets are becoming more and more constrained. And thus the need to continuously raise fares is always present. It would be helpful if some of these larger capital expenditures could be offset somehow by perhaps some state subsidy of some kind. Those discussions are taking place as we move forward. But generally speaking, the state's position has been sort of a hands-off approach when it comes to the Steamship Authority, because they sort of feel that, as the original framers did, that the local people running it seem to be doing a relatively good job. And there's really, aside from any catastrophic emergency, there's really no need for the state to get involved. So that's sort of where we are with that. Things are working, things are good, but a little bit of assistance would be a big help. Also, I don't know if anyone's been on a boat during an astronomical low tide recently, but the dredging of Hyannis Harbor is becoming an issue. Hyannis Harbor was dredged about 10 years ago, and it is needing it again. One of the challenges with that is the Army Corps of Engineers has a tight schedule for dredging, and Hyannis is not a high priority for them. I've made my position known that if boats cannot get in and out of Hyannis Harbor, that's going to severely impact Nantucket, because that's really the only place we can go. If we had to go to Woods Hole or even New Bedford, that would be a disaster for us. But so far, not much is happening on that front. Speaking of massive impacts to Nantucket, the potential right whale speed restrictions that are being talked about would severely impact Nantucket from November through May. They would completely eliminate fast ferry service because the speed restriction says that vessels can only travel at 10 knots. The fast boats are traveling over 30 knots right now, and they're not designed to travel that slow, so they just would not be able to operate, which would force any passengers who are riding on fast ferries now to travel on a slow boat. But the slow boats would also be impacted because right now slow boats are traveling at 13 or 14 knots, and they would reduce down to 10, which would drop the number of trips by a third. So that would obviously impact everything that comes to Nantucket. Amazon packages, food, fuel, medicine, everything that comes on a boat would be reduced by a third. So that would be a huge problem if that goes into effect. I'm hopeful it won't. I'm hopeful there'll be a carve out for Nantucket Sound, but that hasn't been finalized yet. And just to sort of wrap up, I do ride the boats often. I listen to people. I pay the same fares as everybody else does. I wait in standby lines. I struggle to get reservations. I do use the waitlist system, but I try to address as many issues as I can as they come up, and I hope that I can help people. So with that, I do want to say one more thing. So one of my favorite sayings from people just being on the board is I will often get this question from people, even people that have been here a long time. They'll ask me, what time does the noon boat leave? So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I must say I had a bunch of questions, but I think you've answered or at least addressed all of them. The two biggest ones on my mind, other than the staffing issues, were the speed limit and climate change. But it appears that there's a plan to redo the terminal in Nantucket, and that is going to take into account. And the speed limit is just this problem that has to be resolved in some sensible way. I do have a question about, we have the, I guess it's performance document, and if you could just help out the canceled due to columns, the other column, does that encompass the staffing issue?
Yes, there are a number of categories that don't necessarily fit into a specific box. So sometimes, vessels aren't just canceled because they don't have crew or there's a mechanical problem or something, or weather problem. Sometimes they're canceled, believe it or not, because there are no people booked on them. So if it's a freight vessel that is sitting in Hyannis and no one's booked in either direction, it could get canceled, and that trip could be consolidated with a later one. So that's part of the equation there too.
Yeah. Okay, but that's good. I just noticed that the increase in cancellations due to other has been quite significant in the last 2 years, I guess it is, and I was wondering if there's other than what you've discussed, is there some specific reason that needs to be addressed and that people should know about?
Not more than what we've already talked about. These are challenges that everybody is concerned about. but there are no easy answers to any of it, especially when other ferry operators are experiencing the same thing. And, you know, we're just part of that.
Great. So do other people have questions? I appreciate what I've heard so far.
Yeah, Peter, I've got a question if.
Sure.
if-
Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie, thank you very much for the overview. That was quite helpful. I understand we have a lot of temporary issues and challenges, but my question is more about the long-term financing and viability. With all the capital projects that you have in the pipeline and the new vessels, has there been any consideration about municipal financing or federal maritime financing to kind of smooth out the peaks and valleys of the long-term financing as that impacts the operating budget?
Yes and no. So the Steamship Authority can issue bonds. There is currently a $150 million bond limit. And of that right now, the steamship has, I believe, around 85 or 80 million in outstanding bonds. So there is bonding capacity available, which does help offset, you know, a lot of these large capital projects. But as far as it's a slippery slope when you start talking about, you know, the state offering subsidies, because the state's not going to do that without potentially getting some kind of control themselves or some other thing back for their subsidy. So it's kind of a delicate conversation, and the fact that the state doesn't really want to be a part of it because, you know, they've adopted this sort of hands-off approach. But that is a good question, and yes, I mean, financially, it's hard because, you know, it's not just as simple as, you know, traffic and people are on this continual up, you know, trend up, because that's not the case. We've sort of reached the peak of our capacity in recent years, and I don't see how that's going to go up much more than it already is, because there's just no space to add more vessels. There's no docks to add more vessels. There's no time in the day to add more vessels. So we're kind of at the limit. But that is a great question. I don't have a good answer for that.
And just one quick follow-up, Mr. Rainey. I know the state has adopted the philosophy that, you know, it benefits Nantucket and the Vineyard and they should pay for it. But the larger question is the whole Cape and Islands economy as a percentage of the Massachusetts overall economy. There may be some opportunities there to expand that definition, because it is like a definition that's probably 75 years out of date.
And I agree with that. And our local representatives at the State House do listen to those concerns, and they do try to address them. But what happens oftentimes is when these things get to the State House, the other state reps look at us and say, well, you're all millionaires who live out there. What are you complaining about? So we have that problem too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Peter Kahn has his hand up.
Yeah, Peter, before you go, it strikes me this, you know, the reason we have states and things like that is that we all do things together that we can't do alone. And in a way, the Steamship Authority is our highway system, and the Nantucketers are paying for highways or state roads that are built throughout the Commonwealth. And it strikes me that it's fair play for others, given the situation these days, to contribute to the highways in Nantucket in some way. But I'm sure other people have had the same kind of thought. I don't know if that's an argument that has any traction at all with non-Nantucketers. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. Excellent overview. I want to just zero in a little bit more on this issue of crew, because obviously for the long haul and the future of the industry, so to speak, we need a good crew. Number one, I guess, is to what extent is the crew unionized? And if it is, to what extent how are our wages compared to other wages that young young people can obtain in the area? And are we seeing are we seeing these cancellations, which I agree with Peter Halley. I mean, if you have, you can look at the numbers here, but we've all experienced them, have been increasing, sort of. And are they sick outs, or are these union activities? Can you just get a better view of what's going on there, please?
Yes, there are multiple unions involved, which obviously leads to multiple union negotiations from different unions, representing different bargaining units. The pilots and the captains are in a separate union from some of the other workers on the boat. Even the reservations people are in their own union, and so on. And what happens is during some of these negotiations, one bargaining unit will get something, and then the other one wants it, and then the other one wants it, and it becomes this thing. But to address some of the wage stuff, these contracts are usually 3-year contracts. So the most recent one, which is still being finalized, is 3 years old. So yes, the wages are not what they should be today, and those negotiations are, were difficult and still are. Especially when some of the crew members are trying to also address sort of a work-life balance as part of their contract. A lot of them will commute. They don't live, in Hyannis or on the Cape. Some of them come from as far away as Rhode Island to work in Hyannis. So some of those things play into it as well. And then, locally, housing, just like it is here, is a problem. So, to have someone who wants to work at the Steamship Authority, maybe the wages are great, but they don't have housing. So it is a very complicated scenario, but those things are, not being dealt with in a vacuum. They are certainly, trying to be negotiated as fairly as possible.
Just as a follow-up, I noticed, I think that the head of the SSA, resigned. I guess I'm not sure he retired. He resigned. What's going on? I mean, was that just, hey, this is too much, I'm just not getting the support I need? What's going on with the leadership?
Well, so Mr. Davis, Bob Davis, is the general manager. He's been the general manager for 7 or 8 years. He has worked for the steamship since the 1980s. He was the treasurer for a long time, which is really, being the treasurer for the Steamship Authority is really a good background, because a lot of it is driven by financial considerations. And he is approaching retirement age, so he wanted to step back. And that's what he's doing. He's going to stay on as an advisor through the transition as we find a new general manager. But it's not an easy ask, because this is a 24/7 job, every day. I'm talking to him all the time. Other people are calling him and talking to him all the time. There are different issues, from what I'm bringing forth, from what the vineyard's bringing forth. And it's extremely challenging, but he's handled it great. But it's really an age-related thing where he's looking at retirement.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary, and then Lynn.
Thanks, Peter. Rob, thanks for being with us this morning. We appreciate it. Just on something you mentioned, as a member of the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, we've been following the needs of the island. And of course, one of the most important concerns we have is that in perhaps 9 or 10 years, if the terminal is not changed dramatically, lifted, there will be no way for trucks or people to disembark from the ferry. So I know you've mentioned that it's, in theory, the next project. It's going to be a very expensive project, and it's going to take some time. So my real question to you is, do you feel that there's enough of a sense of urgency that this is an issue that really needs to start to be thought of now, because it'll take several years of planning and, of course, to get the financing to raise that terminal so that people and trucks will be able to disembark in the future? To say 5 or 10 years is a little scary to me, because I'm not sure in 10 years we're gonna be able to let people get off the ferry anymore. They'll have to leap from one place to the other, and that'll be the end of truck traffic. What do you think about the urgency?
There's definitely a lot of urgency. Some of those conversations have already begun with the town, for instance, because raising the terminal is great, but then you have to raise the roads around it because those are all going to be underwater. So those conversations are ongoing, and the steamship is very aware that it cannot just go and do whatever it needs to do without considering, the larger picture, how trucks or cars get off the boat, what happens on Easy Street in particular, and those kinds of things. As an example, as part of the Woods Hole project, the entire terminal, based on state flooding maps and coastal resiliency and all that, the entire terminal area had to be raised by about 10 or 11 feet. And that process is interesting to watch. It's based on flood projections and sea level rise and all that. But I imagine that something similar is going to happen here as long as we can get, the connections to Easy Street and the other surrounding areas, all connected together. Whether that, what's done in 10 or 15 years is good to last another 50, I don't know. But there is definitely urgency in that, and those conversations are ongoing.
Thank you.
Good. Lynn?
Hi, Rob. I just want to follow up a little bit on the right whale issue. And because you're seeing articles in the Boston Globe representing this is a critical scientific problem to save a species. But I'm interested in whether the steamship has looked into some scientific affiliations where they could be part of the research in terms of adapting something on the boat that could monitor what is within their travel space, whether we can document what is there and what we could do to avoid it. Because I know writing a letter saying this is critical to our commercial interests, yes, that's entirely true. But I think you would be in a better position if you could also say we are partnering and trying to make to be a valuable partner in saving a species to the extent that we possibly can. And if we get an answer that is negative or speed, what is your contingency plan?
So that's a great question. Up until recently, a lot of that stuff, as far as observations and, whether anyone has seen a whale, was sort of word of mouth. Crews would, if they spotted a whale of any kind, they would report it. But that hasn't happened in Nantucket Sound in decades. The steamship has been part of scientific research, not necessarily with whales, but in the past with school projects where universities are studying water temperature and salinity and things like that, where there are sensors on the boats that help with that. The Steamship Authority has offered to install whale sensing equipment that would help document any whales that are not necessarily visually seen or otherwise observed. That hasn't gone very far. NOAA has sort of taken the approach that they sort of know more than everybody else. So any offers to help with that sort of thing haven't been well received at this point. But there have been conversations along those lines. Even Highline has offered to install whale detecting radar of some kind. I'm not sure what exactly it is on their fast boats, because fast boats would be even more of a problem. The speeds at which they operate, if they encountered a whale, especially at night, if that happened, would be, a big problem. So, those offers are out there, but they haven't gone very far.
Gene?
Yes, thank you. Rob, thank you for appearing before us and for your discussion. One compliment that which the steamship doesn't often get, I know, but this past fall, you guys implemented a late fast boat schedule to accommodate the high school sports teams, when at the same time the High Line canceled its late schedule. So I want to thank you for that, and that obviously shows a good concern for the people of Nantucket. But I guess I want to try to understand the steamship. We often hear of cancellations due to mechanicals, due to maintenance issues, due to staffing issues. I for one have never heard that about the High Line, that they don't seem to cancel, or if they do cancel, they're able to keep it very quiet. So I was wondering what the reasons might be for this discrepancy between the performance of the Steamship Authority versus the High Line.
A lot of that has to do with public versus private. So the High Line's private, so they are not necessarily reporting publicly a lot of these things that are maintenance things that are happening. So they don't get out into the newspapers as much as the steamship issues do, and the steamship has larger vessels, so that's also part of it. But trust me, the High Line has its own issues from time to time. It's just they're not as publicly out there. And just to go back to your previous comment about the last fall, the addition of the late trip, the steamship and the High Line, regardless of what people think, actually work pretty closely together. And so the High Line's schedule change in the fall eliminates their later trip after, I believe it's 5:40 in the evening from Hyannis. So once we saw that was happening, the steamship, felt that it had to do whatever it could to add the extra late trip on the fast boat to accommodate not just sports teams, but other people that would, if they didn't get on that 5:40 boat, would have to take the 8 p.m. slow boat from Hyannis to get back. So that is just an example of some of the cooperation that the steamship and the High Line have together that people don't necessarily see from day to day.
Thank you.
Pat, Jean, are you finished?
Yeah.
Okay, Patty?
Hi, thank you for all the time you give to this whole project when you're not even being paid. I find that amazing. And my question regards to Hyannis. Do we pay them rent in terms of usage of land, or how are they contributing to the bottom line of this? Because they certainly, that's a very big item in their profitability for their city. Where do they stand on that?
Basically, the only benefit that Hyannis gets, or even some of the other mainland port communities gets, is when somebody gets off the boat and buys something in Hyannis or has to stay overnight when the boat's canceled, because the steamship, because it's a state organization, does not pay property tax. So Hyannis is not getting property tax from the Steamship Authority, neither is Nantucket. But the real benefit, despite all the inconvenience of hundreds of trucks or thousands of trucks and cars going through Hyannis, the benefit to them is all the money that we spend there, basically.
So is there any approach to them to, dip into the profitability of keeping us, working well?
There is, but again, the attitude from a lot of mainland representatives that I speak to is that, okay, Nantucket, you are all millionaires over there. Why? What do you need our money for? What are you complaining about? Deal with it on your own.
So you've approached Hyannis.
Yeah, we have. Yes, I'm good friends with the board member from Barnstable. We talk about these things a lot, and he is in touch with the town council over there. I've spoken to members of their board. But it's a delicate, it's a symbiotic relationship, but it's a delicate one. We don't want to overstep or wear out our welcome, so to speak. So there are agreements with Hyannis in the sense that they will not allow us to run boats all night long, which is probably a good thing because people here would be upset with boats coming in at 2 or 3 in the morning. But you know, it is a delicate situation where we don't want to wear out our welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems to me that there is no alternative to Hyannis. If there were an alternative to Hyannis, there would be some leverage as to what the various hosts could provide to have the economic benefits of this operation along with the practical detriments of it. But there is no practical alternative, and so we are where we are. Scott.
Could you comment a little bit on what I'd call the architecture of the relationship with the High Line? In your history, you mentioned that the Steamship Authority was granted a monopoly. Well, evidently that changed at some point. The Steamship Authority has certain obligations to the community in a way that I suspect the High Line doesn't. And so how does all that work? You're dealing with a private competitor. And you're in a regulated or essentially regulated business. I don't think their fares are set by anybody else other than themselves, I would guess. Can you enlighten a little bit on how all that works?
That's a very good question. So the High Line operates on its own, but it does. They don't want to charge too much more than the steamship does, because then people won't take the High Line. They'll ride the steamship, and vice versa. But I'm in touch with the people who run High Line. We have discussions all the time about what's best for the island. The High Line has evolved into almost what I would consider a public utility, in the sense that we rely on it so much. Not just, the steamship does too, because if the High Line went out of business today, all of the people who are traveling back and forth would never be able to fit on steamship boats. So what would happen? We're all sensitive to that. The High Line has sort of grown into this position where, yes, they make money, but they are almost required to continue to operate because we require them to do so. Nantucket, requires them to do so. But yeah, there are a lot of discussions like that happen continuously, especially when licensing renewals come up. And we sort of guide them in the sense that, okay, you all cannot have a boat that leaves at the same time as ours, because that's just silly. We're going to divide 100 people between two boats. Why don't you just have your boat leave a half hour earlier, or the 100 people can go on your boat, and then ours will leave an hour later, and we'll get the rest, whatever it is. And that sort of, it's a sort of a public-private partnership that is not really an official partnership. It's just grown out of necessity that way. And it seems to work for the most part. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's an unusual situation.
It's very unusual. And, it's like I said, it wasn't always this way, because in the beginning, it was more of a competition-based relationship, but now it's more of a one hand helping the other type of thing, because, as I said, the steamship cannot carry everybody, and the High Line does a heck of a job, filling in those gaps, and I don't know where we would be without them.
Yeah. Does the High Line pay a fee for the license that it receives?
They do. So the licensing agreement is a graduated fee schedule where, up to a certain number, I forget what it is, but say up to 100,000 people, they're paying a certain percentage of what the average steamship passenger fare is. And then once you get above that threshold, it's 10% more, 20% more, to the point where, if it almost disincentivizes them to carry, 1 million people a year, because they're paying a lot in licensing fees. But that's just how it works. And it's designed to balance it out between the ferry operators. But honestly, most people tend to go with the High Line at this point.
Who receives the licensing fee?
The Steamship Authority does.
So Liz Coolidge, I see your hand is up.
Hi. Thank you for taking my question. I'm a member of the general public using the Steamship Authority, also a non-resident taxpayer on Nantucket. And I'm curious about the time frame for the website and reservation systems upgrades. I have to say that the website having certain information, say about standby, and then coming to the terminal and being told, oh, we stopped doing that 2 years ago, really is really bad for the public perception of the Steamship Authority. And I'm sure you know that, but as particularly this last year, I feel like the impression that the Steamship Authority is doing well is not the public impression. So any kind of timeline for those upgrades? Thank you. And thank you for your work.
Thank you for that. Those things have become very complicated. The website, as you know, holds a lot of information and does a lot of different things. But the website itself is separate from the reservation system. The reservation system, up until recently, was basically designed and run by a handful of people. Now, those people who designed it, 30 years ago, are now retiring, and the steamship is working with outside vendors to upgrade and modernize the reservation system. But as they get into that, it has become very, very complicated. So it is taking time and money to make that happen. But that is hopefully in the next year or two, the reservation system will be complete. In the meantime, the website plan has been sort of put on hold until the reservation system is up and running. Then the website can be adapted to accommodate that, and other functions that people go to the website for also. But this also brings up another challenge, which is communication. And one of the problems that we have on Nantucket is we don't travel necessarily as much as other communities do. So it's possible to, maybe go once or twice a year. So you go down maybe in January and you're still a certain way of having things done. You go back 6 months later and suddenly it's changed and it's different, and no one told you. Even though there could have been an announcement on the website or an email announcement or something of that nature, but it's very difficult to communicate with people who don't use the service as frequently as others do.
But just one quick follow-up. I've had one piece of information from the website, a separate piece of information from the phone office, and a third piece of information from the person at the terminal. So,
yep. And that's an ongoing problem that I've been trying to address. And some of it is just human nature. Sometimes people just say things and it's wrong. And unfortunately, you get somebody on the phone and you think you know the answer and you just spout it out, but you're wrong. And that person goes away with what you told them and it's wrong. And I get it, because that happens on the dock too. I've seen it. I've been part of that.
thank you.
So, but I hear you.
Gene, you had another.
Yeah, just one thing I thought of. New Bedford, there is a seasonal service from New Bedford to Nantucket, and also 2 years ago when UPS forgot to book its truck equipment coming over on the steamship, they resorted to some barge service to bring their trucks from New Bedford to Nantucket. Does New Bedford fall within the purview of the Steamship Authority, and could the Steamship Authority put a terminal in New Bedford and begin some sort of service between Nantucket and New Bedford, or is that something that's just a ridiculous idea?
No, that's not a ridiculous idea. So the New Bedford has a member on the board. New Bedford has a 10% vote. The problem is that the only place to dock a vessel in New Bedford is a state-owned pier that is fallen into disrepair. And it would require a lot of work to make that available for steamship vessels to dock at. It is okay to use for the passenger, the C Street fast boat that comes over from New Bedford, but for a vehicle boat, it would not be adequate. But the trip is so long, and people on the Nantucket side are so used to and focused on going through Hyannis that to go through New Bedford is like a different world, even though in a lot of cases it would be a lot easier to just get on the highway, because New Bedford is right there. You get on the highway, you can go anywhere. It's a lot easier than going through Hyannis and getting on the highway that way. But it's a long trip. And the barge thing helped out UPS, but they really only took advantage of it a couple of times. But it's as was mentioned earlier, Hyannis is our closest contact, point A to point B type of thing.
Good.
Thanks, Rob.
We have also a question from Nancy's iPhone. Nancy, who are you, and
Hi,
question?
Nancy Hyde. I actually happen to be president of the Fisher's Landing Association, but I'm speaking as a concerned tax-paying non-resident. Just curious, Highline obviously has different freights, different boats, ferries. If the unfortunate hypothetical were to happen that all the boats crossing needed to slow down, is the Highline equipment still capable of going at that slower speed, or would they be shut down as a result?
They would be shut down because those vessels are not designed to travel at those slow speeds for any length of time. So they would be shut down.
So they must be advocating quite vociferously with the state about that. Is there?
They absolutely are, and one of the issues is these restrictions are not simply in our area. They go all the way up and down the East Coast. So there are a lot of even charter fishing operations in the Carolinas, for instance, that would be out of business with this as well. And those people have bigger federal delegations than we do. So I'm hopeful that something positive will come out of this, but you never know what's going to come out of Washington. So I don't know.
So part two of my question would be, does Steamship operate with a government relations subcommittee? Do you have people on your board that actually focus on the government side of things?
No, but the Steamship does have lobbyists and other people involved in the State House and in Washington, D.C. who operate on the Steamship's behalf.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think Rob, you've exhausted all the questions, which is you may be exhausted too. I want to thank you for your presentation and particularly the historical aspect of it to sort of at least settle my mind down as how this all fits in and came to be. I thought Scott's question was interesting about the relationship between the Steamship Authority and the Highline. And just before you go, as I understand it from your presentation, that monopoly that was granted by the state is still there, and that one of the ways the Steamship Authority, as the monopolist, in the good sense of the word, as a public utility, handles the financing the service, is that you go to a private entity to supply boats and service, to do those things that perhaps you don't have the capital or what have you to do. And in a sense, it lowers the risk to the Steamship Authority to have somebody else's capital deployed, providing this additional service. Is that kind of the right way to look at it?
Yep, that's exactly correct. And again, there is a sort of a partnership as far as I'm concerned, as far as the leaders of Highline are concerned. And when issues come up, we do talk to each other. The example from last fall is a good example of that. But yes, absolutely, the steamship could not possibly provide the service levels to accommodate everybody at this point. And so there has to be partnerships, or in this case licensing agreements with Highline and even other carriers like the one that goes to Harwich, the Freedom Cruise Line, and the outfit out of New Bedford. We benefit from all of that as Nantucket people, and I think that's important.
Good. And they just, I guess one question that I have, and maybe the answer is obvious, but how are the rates set? Because I saw something either in the Inky or the Current that the State House had rejected some sort of rate change recently. And how are the rates set by the Steamship Authority for its service?
It's basically they're set to cover the costs, basically. So the cost of service is calculated out, and what the steamship needs as far as revenue to cover that cost of service is pretty much where the fares come from.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation attendance, and hopefully you will pay us a visit again sometime in the future.
Peter, just before we sign off, I had one question that you got triggered by what somebody said about the delegation. And you said that North Carolina has a more active delegation than we do on some of these maritime issues. I mean, I look at the Massachusetts delegation, and particularly our two senators. They're very vocal on a lot of issues. This speed within the Sound is more than just a representative for the Brockton, Bristol County, Nantucket, Dukes County area. This is a Massachusetts issue. Is the governor and the senators getting behind changing this and carving out Nantucket Sound?
Yes, they are. I'm not necessarily involved in those discussions, but I know that they are. I recently heard that the governor's stance is similar to our stance, in the sense that one of the aspects of these speed restrictions is when a whale is spotted, the restriction zone that is in place around that spotting or that observation is huge. So you could spot a whale south of Nantucket, but the slowdown zone would go all the way across the island into Nantucket Sound. So even though there was no whale sighted in Nantucket Sound, you have to slow down from a whale seen on the other side of the island. So that is part of some of the pushback that the local people are giving to the government, and the governor is certainly on board with that.
Thank you.
I also have a question. Rob, I want to thank you for your very comprehensive overview of the SSA. Thank you very much for your time. What about considering Woods Hole again for additional service? Is that a consideration?
It would be, although the residents of Woods Hole and Falmouth are already having issues with Martha's Vineyard, because Martha's Vineyard, that is their mainland port, and they on the Martha's Vineyard side, they handle about 3 times as many people, trucks, and vehicles as we do. So it has become an issue where the towns around Woods Hole itself are sort of not liking the steamship at all, or the people of Martha's Vineyard coming through their town. So I don't know. I mean, in an emergency, that could probably work, but we're also limited by dock space. There's only 3 slips in Woods Hole, and we would have to share it with the vineyard. So it's something for emergencies only, really, at this point.
Capacity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So there is, I take it, we have problems with deer in cars, and so I've seen people talk about putting deer whistles on their cars. There are no whale whistles that you can put on these boats.
There could be. I don't know. That's a great question. I imagine there probably is. I mean, the option that was presented was more of a detection device, so that if you do see a whale, you could report it in, and you could go around it, or whatever the situation was. But yeah, no, that would be a great thing. Yeah, a whale deterrent of some kind.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been a whale of a,
Hold that one.
thank you very much. If you want to get out of here, I suggest you do leave meeting quickly.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me see where we are. That was good and informative. Update on, is there any update on town council study? I know we pretty much were there. Steve?
Before we lose many of the 36 people on this meeting, I just want to ask, I'm putting the PR committee ahead of some other things. How did people find out about this meeting? And especially for those who stay, are you interested in our group? And are there anything in particular that you're interested in? If anyone can, and any of the non-members would be interested in speaking to that.
I'm not seeing.
I see Liz.
I found out about this meeting from the Inquirer and Mirror, and didn't know this body existed. So I don't know if I can't say more about my interest, but this meeting is open to the public, continues to be open to the public.
We meet approximately once a month, and during the summer, we meet on the island at one of the communications trailers next to the Stop and Shop more frequently, every 2 to 3 weeks. So the come to those meetings, and the agenda are published in advance of the meeting, so you can check the town website and look for the agenda for this group and see when the meeting is and what is proposed to be discussed. And if there's an item that is of particular interest to you that you think is broader than just your own individual interest, but an item of interest to non-resident taxpayers in general, you could bring it up with one of us and see if it gets on an agenda, or bring it up at the public section of one of these meetings.
Peter, I'll put the address for the town's website for advisory committee in the chat. People can check there periodically to see if we've got an agenda posted. And then you can also sign up on the town's website to be automatically notified when we do have a meeting scheduled. So I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, and just for those of you who are interested, our mission is, under the current town bylaws, is to provide advice to the select board on issues of concern to non-resident taxpayers. That's what we do. The select board at the end of the day and the town meeting are the entities that have the actual power to take the actions that we might recommend. Okay, Kit Murphy, I see your hand is up. You need to unmute yourself, Kit, if you have a question or comment.
Sorry about that. I was
That's all right.
operating without my reading glasses. I am a resident taxpayer and voter, so obviously I'm precluded from participating in your organization, but I do watch your meetings on a fairly regular basis, and I think you've become an integral part of what happens on the island and getting your viewpoint out there. And I think that's in incredibly productive. I hope you can gather more people into your fold and, you know, become even more effective and have a greater impact. That being said, if anybody ever has a question about, gee, what are the locals thinking? What's the scuttlebutt? Just, you know, give me a call. I'm happy to answer that.
Great, great. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we all have a common interest, and that is see that the island thrives and people find it a good place to live and a good place to visit. And hopefully we can bring some additional focus to some of the things that would help improve the lives of everybody on the island. Nancy? Nancy?
The original question was, how did we find out about the meeting?
Yeah.
I found out about it with the Daybreak Nantucket email, but I follow what goes on a lot because in my off-island life, I actually served on my town's select board for 18 years. So I have a lot of interest and experience at the state government level, which was part of why I was asking the questions I did. So anyway, I appreciate that you got it out there in the news, and that was my way of knowing.
Great. Anybody else to answer Steve's question? Well, I think that's good representative answers. The answer, Steve, is that the work that you've been doing to get this publicized is paying off.
Well, I would also say the subject.
Yes.
Since we normally have one or two people call in, and today we had 20 non-members. I think the subject matter was of interest as well.
No question.
Yeah, but you have to communicate as you are doing that there's something afoot, and if you're interested, you might want to tune in, which is good. So now let's go to the Town Council Study Committee, and I think as we left that, the issue is on the ballot for I guess it's not on the ballot for this meeting, but it's not ballot on the future meeting. In a sense, it's on the ballot for this meeting, in that there is at least one citizen warrant that seems to endorse the continuation of town council meeting versus other forms of government. But anyway, Donna or Donna, any additional information about town council that?
We haven't met since our chairman spoke at the select board meeting on December 11th. But everything is positive. We did get the sense, as you referred to, the sense of votes, which will be discussed and at the May ATM. And also we have permission to distribute some information. So our rationale is exposure and continuous exposure, as well as updating the registered voters who are attending the ATM. We're working on finishing the new charter. We're going to have several more informational meetings. We had, I think, 3 before the holiday, and we're going to have some more before the ATM. We're getting the draft article prepared, and then it's going to be submitted to the select board, the town manager, and town legal counsel. And we hope to present this to I think there's a special town meeting. So we hope to be prepared for that with the new charter, with the approval from the legal department or the legal firm. And that's it. So we're on schedule.
Okay,
We're on schedule.
So you've mentioned we're on schedule. What is the schedule date for the new charter draft?
Well, before the fall special meeting, there's supposed to be a fall special meeting.
Yeah.
We'll be prepared for that. We'll have all the legal approval, and it'll go through the select board. Michael has a question? Oh, okay.
I guess there was also some discussion at our last meeting as to whether or not there would be any presentation at but I guess I'll call the spring town meeting regarding the town council committee's work. And is that any advance on thoughts on that?
It's going to happen. We got permission, and I think Joe may be the person presenting 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But that's all been cleared with Sarah Alger. So that's why I said we're on target. We'll do a little bit of an update. We'll have some information for everybody who's attending, and we'll have a little question and answer kind of thing.
Great.
But it won't take it. We've been given just a few minutes, but I think it might take longer than that.
Okay.
So we'll have everything ready for the fall. Let me see when it is. I don't know, but there's going to be a special town meeting in the fall, and we're going to be prepared for it. And we also have an email in case anybody wants to email our committee. It's obviously tcsc@nantucket-ma.gov. So we have an email up and running as well.
So Donna, the question is, at the spring meeting, the actual ATM meeting, where they're going to ask for the sense of the meeting with
Yeah.
respect to what they're told at that meeting about the new town council. Is there going to be a vote? It'll be a non-binding vote, of course, but so you do think they will actually present it for a non-binding vote?
Yes, and
Thanks.
it's been couched in the terms of a sense of, yeah.
Yeah,
But we
non-binding,
want to
yeah,
we do want some feedback.
good.
So that's important to us.
Okay.
And our next, oh, I'm sorry, Peter, our next meeting, if anybody wants to tune in,
Mhm.
is this Wednesday. And we meet from 3 to 5.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Kit Murphy, you got a question? Your hand is still.
I just wanted to say that in addition to the sense of the meeting vote at the Springs annual town meeting, that 2 weeks later, there's going to be, and I guess I would call it a sense of the community ballot question when we have our local elections. And I have to believe you're going to see 2 very different levels of the percentage of people in favor of the town council format, because many more people vote in the election than attend town meeting, obviously.
Yeah, that's one of the major issues that I guess sparks interest in having a town council form of government. More participation rather than less. But thank you. I didn't know that, so I appreciate it. Anybody else? No. So why don't we move on to the next one, which is the master plan input sessions. I'll sort of, Kathy circulated to a couple of us I guess it's a handout to individuals who might want to put together master plan groups to discuss input to the master plan, and that has been organized by the town to get more input into the master plan. And I have the questions that the town is asking, and thought we might take a couple of moments to get a sense of this group on those questions, which then one of us can write back to the town about. Lynn, you have your hand up. You have.
I just want to add something to this that you may not be familiar with. The 5 questions are very general in nature. And so all the civic associations were very concerned that the area plans are not being used. So the chairs of the Civic League approached Leslie Snell to ask for a meeting, of which she declined and said it would not be necessary, nor does she feel she'll be using any area plans at this point with the consultant. So this is very disheartening because area plans are very specific and filled with lots and lots of information that would be very useful. And so I think it is an issue for the town that they are missing primarily the vote and of what would make a very valid input to the master plan. So as you go through these questions with Peter, you'll realize that they're a little too general, and the civic leagues have been very unhappy with the lack of participation because the previous planning director said these were integral to how they would do the planning and were state mandated. So I just wanted to give you a piece of information.
Okay, I see a hand raised by a Holly. I don't know what's the Holly. But Holly, did you have some information on this?
You want to unmute yourself?
I got it. I'm Holly's husband. I'm Scott Wilson. I'm on her computer.
Hi.
Hi. I'm also the co-president of the Civic League. And I just wanted to clarify briefly the remarks that were just made. Ms. Snell's response was not that the area plans wouldn't be used. It was simply that how those plans will be incorporated into the master plan has yet to be determined. That didn't give us any comfort, but that was her response to that was her response. That's quoting from her response to the Civic League. So it's up in the air.
Okay. Okay, it's good. So why don't we, Peter Kahn?
Yeah, just a quick, Peter, I'm happy to have this discussion, but I am a little concerned about the ACNVT taking a position on these issues based on a short meeting here where we haven't all had had an opportunity to really think about this, and B, I think these questions are so general that I think we are far better served by having, if people want to comment, everybody should do so in their individual capacity.
Okay, well, why don't I just go over the questions and we can then send them out to people. But these questions are designed to be discussed without, sort of the three best answers, not necessarily the answer to be given. And I think there's a deadline for this part of just what, in a week or two?
The end of January.
End of January.
Yeah.
So we could either, schedule a special meeting for this sort of thing if there was an interest in it, or we could sit out and kibitz or what have you. But let me just go through these generalized questions without any response first, and then we can figure out what we want to do in one way or another.
And also, Peter, I got clarification from Megan Trudell that this is just an informal thing. It's just to throw around ideas to be considered when that's not anybody taking a stand on anything. And also, if we were to do this at a different meeting, it's not that we don't have to have an open meeting law ACNVT. It's just a group of people. That's who we would be if we did this.
Right.
And we wouldn't need a quorum and we wouldn't need anything like that. So if we wanted to do something separate, we could do it, send the recording to the town, and then also fill out the forms. It does not have to be as part of our formal meeting. I just wanted to clarify.
Right. And I think the only requirement is, again, no special notice or anything else, but that the individuals who want to do this would list their names so they know who was making the comments, and that's about it. There would need to be a sort of a secretary of the group to take down the comments and submit them. It's almost like a self-created group to provide their ideas in response to these very generalized questions. It looks to me like either they're designed to tease out any issues that might not otherwise be teased out by the people creating the master plan and missed thereby, or to be able to point in the aftermath to saying, well, these were the issues that everybody was concerned about when they come up with their master plan. Probably a little bit of both. But so here are the questions. Question one is, these are really difficult questions, so but I don't think you need a pencil and a piece of paper. What are your favorite things about Nantucket? That's question one. Question two. Actually, I've seen question three. Question two is, what are your least favorite things about Nantucket? Question three, what is missing in Nantucket? Question four is, what would you predict will be some of the important issues to consider when planning for Nantucket's future opportunities, challenges? Those are sort of three questions in one. And question five is, if you could do one thing to improve Nantucket, what would it be? Probably be have shorter meetings. Yeah, and that's it. So that is the level of that is being asked for from the general public to sit down and consider these things in an organized way and provide feedback. So if there's interest in doing that, maybe what we should do is pick a date, and then whoever wants to, indicate whether you're interested in participating on that date in this or not, and we'll either submit something that would identify this as a group of non-voters from the ACNVT or what have you.
Peter, I think that's the very reason why. I mean, I think we should. I mean, I'm happy to have the discussion. I think we should encourage our members to participate in this. But for us to come together as a group to decide what the most favorite thing is or what the least favorite thing is, to me makes no sense whatsoever, because I think we'll never come to consensus on that sort of thing.
I absolutely agree with Peter Kahn. It's ridiculous to think that this group of us is going to come to the same conclusion as to what is our favorite thing and what's the least favorite thing. Just ridiculous to even think we could come to some conclusion on that.
I don't think we have to conclude. I think we just have to list them, whatever our people's ideas were.
Yeah, I guess I didn't go over the rules, which probably I should have in the first place. Why don't we just circulate this to everybody and they can take a look at it? But one of the rules is, as I understand it, is that you don't come to conclusion. Rather, you just pick the three things that the people participating in that group think are answers to the five questions, each one having three responses, so that there is not the only consensus would be of the various ideas. These are likely the three ideas that are being submitted.
But all the ideas, all the ideas can be submitted. I mean, I'd rather take the time to, I'll fill out the form. I'm sure all of us would take 5 minutes to fill it out. But I just don't think it's, I just don't think it's appropriate for the ACNVT as an entity to sort of say, this is the ACNVT. We got a lot, who knows whether what we say, is anywhere close to being representative of the 85% of the population that we taxpayers that we represent.
This is just supposed to be kitchen conversations of like five people just shooting the breeze. It's not taking a position by ACNVT or anybody.
I can do it, but we can all do it separately. Why do we need to do it as a kitchen?
Well, you already have a separate individual survey that you could answer. So this is on top of that and designed more to be kind of neighborhood or friend oriented, not committee oriented.
Okay, and we have Holly I'm sorry, Holly's husband, whose hand is up.
Checking in.
Yeah,
So could I ask you just to repeat number 4? I didn't get it all.
Oh, sure. Let me find it here. Question 4 is, what would you predict will be some of the important issues to consider when planning for Nantucket's future? Question mark. Opportunities? Question mark. Challenges? Question mark. For example, climate change, or ferries, or what have you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, they are very, very broad, and my guess, I've not seen the neighborhood master plans or plans, but my
Oh,
guess.
I shared that with you, Peter, last year, and they're findable on the Town of Nantucket website.
Yeah, well, what I was going to suggest is probably the answers to all 5 of these questions are in those plans.
Yes,
Which is, I think,
exactly.
was your original point.
Which is what makes it so unusable to me, because the the area plans are based on surveys with, a couple hundred people in an area, or feedback and meetings. So you can tell I'm a little biased on this issue after chairing an area plan.
Really?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell.
You had no idea, right?
No, none whatsoever. Okay, so I think taking Peter Kahn's idea, yeah, I think number 1, Kathy, if you would just send out the questions to everybody, and then if anybody has an interest individually or getting together with 2 or 3 people and putting something in from that group, not from this group, that would be fine. And we can proceed on to, I think at the last meeting, we discussed the citizen warrant articles that we found of interest at that time. So I'm not sure that there is a need to do that again at this meeting, unless somebody has some other citizen warrant issue that they want to bring up at this point.
Well, just the only thing is just that the town council has weighed in on them at this point. So that hadn't happened at our last meeting. So there's just, if anyone's interested, on the ATM website for 2025, you can look at all the citizen articles and you can see what town council has said about each one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. And then this has been a continuing subject of what what do we think the town's priorities should be, and so on and so forth. I think we've probably gone long enough today to kick that down the road to another meeting.
Yeah, although Peter, I must say, I agree totally with that, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I'm sure others saw it, that the Inky Mirror, in its editorial for the new year, the first time that I can remember, seemed to endorse subtly the idea of a town garage that looked good. So I think that it should be somewhat encouraging to our discussion in that regard.
Good, good. The next meeting, let me just mention what we've been trying to get a meeting on the capital requirements of the town, looking at present and looking forward. And Libby Gibson has said that she could make a meeting on February 15th. And I take it that means that Brian Turbot would also be at that meeting. And I responded that I would, check to see if we would change our meeting to that date, which I recommend we do. So instead of February 4th or whatever the meeting was, is February 15th agreeable with the folks online here, and then we can make that the next meeting, and I will confirm with Libby and Brian for that date. I mean, one thing that becomes more and more apparent as we roll forward, there are just immense capital requirements that are foreseeable. It's kind of daunting to look at it all and even within the time frame and how they will be met, especially in light of other capital projects that seem to be, teed up in advance for consideration. Yeah, Scott. You need to unmute yourself, Scott.
If we're going to talk about capital, one of the things that I don't have a good handle on, and maybe it's something that already exists, is a shorthand sort of review of the island's finances. Where are we on revenue? What sort of debt is the island carrying? What sort of, bonding capacity do we have? All of which is sort of the predecessor of discussion of capital requirements. I don't know that we, maybe it's a presentation by somebody, maybe this already exists in shorthand version that could be circulated to the group, but that's something that I'd love to have a better handle on.
It does. Brian Turbot regularly gives this out, and it's also posted. If you want, I can find the link to it and share it with to everybody in the group.
Good.
He does a presentation.
That'd be awesome.
Libby does as well. So I think that's probably what they would use as the source of information when they talk to us. And that way we could all get a heads up on, on what it says already.
Yeah, I saw the last
I think the
presentation.
select board is going to review it again. I think they look at it every couple of weeks as we get closer to town meeting. They're looking at that. And also just one more thing, there's a planning board meeting 4:15 this Thursday, and that's when they're going to go over the zoning articles that are supposed to be presented but that came in from citizens warrant articles. So that's when they're going to look at the zoning ones to give their recommendations or not on each one of them. And just FYI.
But Brian did make a very extensive presentation to the select board a few meetings ago. And if Kathy, you could find that and send it to Scott. Yeah. It's very, very informative. Talks about our expected revenues, our expenses, and what kind of capital stuff in the future. It's very informative. And if you can get a copy of that or take a look at that, you'll be well educated and frightened about the prospects for the future.
Yeah.
I'll send the link around.
Yeah.
I know where it is.
Good.
Yeah, I think the most frightening thing about that is I recall from looking at it is that it acknowledges that not all of the requirements are there on the presentation. In other words, they're just the more the ones that are firmer than others that are obviously out there but have not been quantified, and it's almost you have on the books and off the books type of stuff. Anyway, so I guess we'll get a lot of information around to people to look at. I'll inform them that we've changed our meeting to the 15th of February, and we'll go from there. I take it that in a sense, we've had the PR committee report already, Steve?
Yep.
Yes. No.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I mean, it seems to me that the subject matter is what draws people to the meetings. Although it's interesting that there are still about 8 or 9 people still on who came for other than the Steamship Authority presentation, and I would certainly welcome them back to our future meetings.
Yeah.
Steve, can I add one thing, Peter, though? I noticed one thing different this time with the announcement, Steve, and I don't know whether you had anything to do with it or not, but they used a picture of Rob Ranney,
Well,
prominently.
I
But again, I think
think,
it's the topic probably that anything more than anything.
I think this was a slow news week,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it ran in the Inquirer and Mirror 4 times.
Yeah.
It ran with a nice picture in the Current, and it ran in Daybreak 3 times. So so I think that might have something to do with it as well.
Yeah, just a question, Steve, and this is more to do with the economic consequences of this right whale speed restriction. I know it's getting a lot of attention with Representative Keating, but I have actually looked on the website for a couple of other Massachusetts state reps, and it wasn't anywhere prevalent on the website. And I'm wondering if an editorial or something in the Globe, or talking to Libby about, I'm sure they have a political action committee, but it doesn't strike me that the whole Massachusetts delegation is firmly behind this, and the consequences to Nantucket and the Vineyard would be devastating if this ever goes through.
My sense is that they're on top. I mean, I think the town is doing, they are, this is front and center. Now whether they can influence the other.
It's not so much the town, Peter. It's just, I think
No, I hear
the rest
you.
of the delegation
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
seem to be focused on it at all.
Yeah, I don't
That's
know.
why
I don't
I asked
know.
the question about
Yeah.
the governor.
Yeah.
I mean, this could be catastrophic
Yeah.
to the Cape and Islands.
Yeah.
Well, are there other ferry services, maybe not as important as our ferry services in the Commonwealth, out of Boston? Aren't there a lot of boats that?
Well, there's a lot of commuter boats that go from like Hingham to Boston, and I suspect they'll all be impacted. And and maybe I'm misreading it, to be honest with you. And it's with everything else going on in Washington and all the drama of the new administration, it doesn't rise to the top, of their agenda. But for southeastern Massachusetts, this is absolutely critical.
You can rest assured that the new administration will not be in support of the right whales. So I suspect that if this is brought to their attention, this will die.
Can I raise if the wrong whales are supporting the right whales, they may be in favor of it.
Can I
All right,
raise a point?
I rest my case on that issue.
Can I raise a point? I don't know how to raise my hand on I'm on my phone, but hi, my name's Craig Syracuse. This is the first time I've been on here, and I really appreciate this. It's great that you got Rob. I've worked with him on a couple things. I think he's great, and the fact that he's uncompensated, works so hard is great. And then to get on today and answer everybody's questions, transparently, and he clearly is trying to make a lot of improvements. But I live in Mattocket, and I'm also a lobbyist in Washington. I actually represent the town. Is my pro bono client, unfortunately pro bono. And one of the things that I've worked on is getting money for Tom Nevers for the erosion there, and hopefully we'll get a couple $1 million. But I spent a lot of time on the speed rule. I will tell you, the town does not have political action committee. The town, the only thing they've done is ask people to write to their legislators. You're exactly right. Two of our 3 federal legislators have not taken an aggressive stance. Congressman Keating has. In letters to Senator Markey, he is completely ambivalent, kind of takes both sides of the issue. The only reason we're still in the fight is, as Rob pointed out, and you could hear his frustration, is because the southern and mid-Atlantic states, their members have been very aggressive. The rule is currently with OMB. To think that they're going to carve out an exemption of a rule that's already drafted and written and out of NOAA is not very likely. So what we're looking at is a NOAA rule that could be dropped prior to the change of administration on the 20th. I think you're correct in suggesting that the Trump administration would probably oppose it. However, once the rule is promulgated, you now have to rescind it. So that makes it even more difficult. There is a provision that I've worked with several members of Congress, not ours, to get in the House Appropriations bill, which would deny funding for the implementation of the bill, of the NOAA rule. That's in the Commerce Appropriations Subcommittee. On the House side, there is no provision on the Senate. And as you all know, the fiscal year 25 appropriations bill will not be done until March, which means that we need to try and get the Senate to recede to the House in conference and keep that provision, or let it go through. You're absolutely correct that this would be devastating. I don't think anyone really understands how bad this would be for the island of Nantucket. Senator Warren has, I don't know where she is on this. And I'm not going to, I don't mean that to be political. I literally reached out and don't know. But the people who are helping the most are the members down in the southern states, because this is an ocean access issue. We also, when Rob says that he has a lobbyist, they really don't. They use an association, and that association lobbies to the lowest common denominator, obviously. So they're not looking out for Nantucket specifically. Probably the most aggressive person on this has been Murray Scudder over at the Highline. But before I start dragging everybody into the weeds, I'm going to stop. But if somebody wants to talk more about it offline or wherever else, I'd be happy to do that. But you're right, this is an issue. One of the things somebody raised today, which was an awesome question, was what unions does the steamship have? I would tell you right now that if the three or one of the unions, Teamsters, were to write a letter to the governor, or more importantly to the three federal legislators, it would have an impact. A lot of the other members in other states have asked for us to weigh in on that. But right now, the advocacy is for more of the fishing groups and the ocean access. So larger boats. There's not a lot of ferries down down the coast. We're kind of unique in this regard. So it would be good to see our leadership get a little more aggressive. The state has written an opposition, and the governor has been, is on this. That's for sure. But there's more to be done here. And, even if it doesn't get promulgated on January 20th, this is out there. This is what NOAA believes. There's not a lot of data to suggest that it's even an issue for Nantucket Sound. There's never been a sighting. But so anyway, I think it's great. And maybe this organization might want to even think about writing a letter. You're in support of Libby and the select board, so you're certainly not counter to what the town, their position on this, and it may only bolster them. And anyway, but thanks. And I guess one other question I had is, has this organization raised the windmill issue at all, or is that just way too controversial? Or anyway, thank you very much. Thanks for doing this meeting.
We've basically stayed away from the windmill issue.
Okay.
But
I understand.
one of the questions that I have, Craig, is that, a common denominator of both this issue and the windmill issue is whales. And there's a tension between windmills are bad for whales, but boats are bad for whales. Other than the fact that there hasn't been a whale sighting in 100 years or something in Nantucket Sound. And I'm not for or against whales. It's just that
right.
That seems to be a common denominator, and NOAA, by the way, also.
Well, it is right. It is and it isn't, right? So is that NOAA? So it's interesting how it gets linked to both issues. But then the question you have to ask is, if NOAA were to promulgate that, does that help with the wind and offshore wind agenda, or does it hurt? So there are some who suggest that the two are tied, and that the NOAA promulgated rule would actually is designed to help offshore wind in that agenda. I don't want to get into that on this, and we could talk about that forever, but you're right. I get a little nervous when the whale issue comes up on windmills, because our advocacy is to basically suggest that right whales are not an issue, and this is a solution looking for a problem that doesn't exist, right? So you're exactly right, and we have to be fairly cautious in our language. But yeah, anyway, that's a great point. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, but I think Craig raises the issue of whether we should somehow either a letter to the governor or a letter to our senators by the non-voting taxpayers, should we communicate about the speed limit? I think it would be a disaster for non-voting taxpayers, who, many of whom travel back and forth on a regular basis, using the ferries, etc. Shouldn't we be taking a position? And if it's so immediate, maybe we have to do it in the next week or two before anything can be done on January 19th.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Gene, and that's fine. But I think the attention ought to be immediately with the incoming administration. We're talking about 16 days before they come in. I think there are people who have contact, to keep NOAA from implementing this thing. I find it a little difficult to believe that they could actually implement this in the next 2 weeks. But I defer to Craig's expertise on that. But short of that, I think we need to be on top of the Trump administration needs to be focused on this, or at least hear about it. Obviously, they got a million things coming before them, but it would be great to get this, get somebody to on the inside to be on top of this.
Yeah, I would just say on that, sitting at OMB, right? So it's been through the agency process, and there are a bunch of things sitting at OMB. So the question is, who's behind this? The irony is, Joe Biden knows Nantucket. It would have been great if somebody pulled him aside, or somebody aside when he was there for Thanksgiving, and said, this would be devastating. Your stuff wouldn't even be able to get over here to allow you to come over. I don't think it's at his level. I think I know where this is within the White House, but I think any letter to whomever you guys decide to write it is fine. I think to the incoming Trump administration, to the two senators and the congressmen, and just to reiterate, Keating has been fantastic on this and has testified and has been great. I think that only bolsters, you're totally consistent with the town and Libby's position. I think that it's, to the extent that this organization is supportive of the elected and not unelected town leaders, it's totally consistent. It's a different perspective. I think it would be welcome, and I wouldn't let time be the enemy of getting a position out there. So even if you can't get anything in time to get to the current administration, exactly what you said, write it for the next or through the three federal legislators.
Well, my guess is, by the way, my guess is that Markey and Warren are lying low on this, because they're they have their supporters have sort of very much mixed feelings on it. But I guess it would be interesting to get somebody on the inside at the White House who's got with OMB to sort of see where this thing really is. Is it really likely to come down? I mean, again, writing a letter is fine, but the question is, what's realistic here? Is it realistic that to think that this is going to come down in the next 14 days?
I don't know. I spent a lot of time working against it. So I mean, whether it is or it isn't, I can't tell you, nor do I really care. I have to operate as though it could, right? For what I do for a living. So
no, but I agree. No, Craig, yeah. I don't disagree with you. I guess the question is, how can we, writing a letter at this late stage, as far as being effective, doesn't seem to me. I mean, what's going to be effective is getting the right person on the telephone and finding out where it stands.
Yeah, I totally agree. So the National Marine Manufacturers Association is pretty aggressive on this. And Rob talked about technology. That is one of the solutions, because everybody understands that this is, at some point, this rule, may see the light of day, even if it gets killed the next year, whatever. So how do you stop it in the future? And one way is technology. So there are, and like he said, Murray Scudder has agreed that, hey, if there's something we can put on the ferries, I'll strap it on, for free. Same with the steamship.
Sure.
And both have been great. Yeah, but back to your point, I certainly wouldn't suggest that a letter from this organization would move the needle in the short term. But I do think that you know, the more letters you have. And I think this is it's a non-controversial way for this organization to kind of, you know, bring a different argument to the table, right? And you're not writing the letter just for this time. It's for if this continues, if someone else raises it in the future. I think this group has unique considerations. You know, there's a medical supply, getting people off. That's a good argument. There's the sports is a huge issue. But I think rather than kind of reiterate those, I think you could bring a unique issue to the table. Again, I'm not suggesting that it will be the letter that, you know, successfully kills this rule, but I think every letter helps. Thanks.
So it strikes me that one of the things that we can say, other than this is like, you know, taking a gun to Nantucket's head, is it'd be like enacting a national 200-mile-an-hour speed limit for aircraft flying over the continental United States. It's really quite much the same thing. But our constituency, in a sense, is not particularly a local constituency. It's then not a Nantucket constituency, it's a national constituency. People from probably all 50 states own property in Nantucket, and it impacts all 50 states in that way. And we might, you know, say something like that. I don't want to do the research to actually support what I just said, but just that we have, this would be a letter to the select board with copies to anybody who makes, who it would be helpful to send this to. But in general, what we've done in the past is we've made recommendations to the select board, which is our assignment, so to speak. So we could do a very, very short letter, two paragraphs, making these points and fire it off if that's of interest to people. Scott, you have your hands up.
Yeah, the shortest of short points is for somebody like a senator to say, please, you know, this is a huge issue. Please do not implement this immediately. It needs more consideration. I ask that you put the final approval on hold.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's, you know, typically there's a fair amount of deference. You know, that would seem, rather than, you know, a long substantive discussion, which I'm sure they've had before them, saying, you know, too big, too important, needs to, and given, you know, changes, needs to go on hold for further consideration and not be done in the next, you know, the next 14, 15 days, which I think is probably the real substantive fear right now.
Right, and it doesn't necessarily have to be our, you know, I think trying to get the Massachusetts senators to do that may be a very uphill fight. If there's, you know, the Middle Atlantic or Southern senators might be much more effective and could get that done.
After listening to the discussion, it does sound like the approach is wrong. It really should be technology that would solve the problem, not the speed, just based on what Craig is saying and so forth.
And I would encourage, you can also go to the National Marine Manufacturers Association website. I don't work for them. I'm not trying to shill for them, but they do have a lot of, you know, obviously it's biased on their side of the issue, but there's a lot of discussion about technology that's out there and what they're trying to work on. I mean, what would be really cool is to find some of this technology to work, use Nantucket to actually test it. Our ferries can somehow bring, you know, some kind of jobs or work with Woods Hole and come up with, I mean, that's, now I'm really taking you down a rabbit trail, but the technology is just not quite there yet, but there are a lot of, I mean, think Department of Defense. So there are a lot of technologies which could be, you know, civilianized, if that's a word. Anyway, and guys, I'm really sorry. I think I probably right at the end of the meeting kind of threw this out there, but so I apologize for that. I think this group is great, and I really appreciate you getting Rob. And this is the first time I've listened in, but I will definitely look to, you know, listen in and hopefully not talk as much. Sorry, in the future. But thanks.
Craig, I think that's wonderful. I hope you come back, and everyone else who's listening also. We appreciate your participation. I just like to add, Craig, based on what you're saying, we could offer ourselves as a pilot program and maybe help turn around the idea. In other words, we're open to any kind of technology that will help satisfy everything. So why don't use us as a pilot project?
I totally agree, and believe me, that's one thing that we're considering trying to figure out how to work that. And again, Congressman Keating's been great. Just he's been really helpful on Tom Nevers, so he's been helpful on this issue, and I think anyway, yeah, happy to do that. Happy to discuss this offline. I mean, right now I know I'm ruining the whole meeting, so happy to discuss this with anyone offline. But thank you.
Gene, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. A lot of our constituency, non-voting taxpayers, I know a whole bunch of guys who live in Texas and have summer homes here. And so if there were a way we could get this out, with this two paragraph letter out in the Inky or Current or one of the other documents, newsletters that are read by our constituency, there are probably a lot of the guys in Texas that I know from Nantucket are very well connected politically, and they may be able to go to their senators who would be much more inclined to support the position that you're saying that Warren or Markey are less likely to support. And those senators might be able to say something that puts this on hold. So I think anything we can do to get our constituency to act on this would be helpful, because the guys from Houston will be just as affected by this speed limit as the non-voting taxpayers who live in Massachusetts.
So last thing, and I really am sorry for this. If you have somebody in another state, I would be more than happy to draft the letter, get them the address, and do all the legwork on behalf of that, because I think that would be a great idea, especially some of the people who have homes on Nantucket and have political influence. They do that as part of their jobs or whatever. So I'm happy to be helpful and take some of that burden off and make it easy to get a letter. I do think it's effective, but yeah, thanks.
What is your contact information? You're online, in public here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to give it to you. No, I'm happy to give it to this group. Is it easier for me to shoot you an email, or I can just rattle it off right now?
Rattle it off. And
okay, great. So it's KSIRACUSE, K Syracuse at hithercreekstrategies.com. Yeah.
Hither,
HCS was gone. Just like Hither Creek on Nantucket. HITHERCREEKSTRATEGIES.com. Hither Creek Strategies.
Okay. So if we come up with something, we can send a draft to you to look at, or vice versa.
Sure. And if there's somebody on this call, I'm happy, as I do updates on this topic, I'm happy to send it to a point person for, if you want to disseminate it. Hey, here's what we're hearing. Here's what's going on. I'm happy to do that. I mean, Rob and I talk about this issue quite a bit.
Why don't you send it to Kathy? Why don't we have him send it to Kathy? We should, that way, our secretary.
And Craig, what is your phone number?
It's 202-557-9526.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, first of all, we'll have to take a vote on this to see whether we're going to do something. But it sounds to me like everybody's in interest of not seeing a speed limit imposed in the immediate future on ferry service to Nantucket in Nantucket Sound. But it's a sort of the two paragraphs basically say there, would it be accurate to say that we understand there is technology under development
Sure.
that would potentially would resolve the problem, number one, and that there have been no whale sightings in the affected area, Nantucket Sound, for 100 years. And therefore, there should be no cost in waiting to see that technology develop and implemented or something like that.
Right, delay the rule, given that there is technology currently in development in the near term, as a near-term solution, we feel that it would be most prudent to delay the promulgation of any rule affecting the speed limit, blah, 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 something like that.
Yeah, anything like that.
Again, I'm happy to help draft this offline. I think this is a really important issue. If you talk to Nat Lowell, he'll walk you through why even the slow ferries would be devastated because of the, even though they go pretty close to 10 knots. And so it's really a pretty big issue. And again, Murray Scudder's been very vocal on this. If you just have to Google it in the current. But yeah, I'm more than happy to be helpful on this. And if you want to avoid, if you take a vote or don't take a vote, if you have names of people who would be happy to write a letter and think they could be helpful, I'm happy to do the legwork to make that happen. And again, I would just hammer down that, this is consistent with where Libby and Brooke and the town have been. So I think that, this would probably be welcomed by them. It's just another voice with a good different angle. Thanks.
I also think we should add that we're very willing to offer Nantucket as a
We can't speak.
test case or a pilot program.
We don't have that authority. We can suggest that the board
Okay, then we can suggest it. Why don't we do that? It's very helpful to show that we're interested in offering our assistance however we can.
All right, can we take a vote, Peter? Because it's getting late here.
Yeah, so all those in favor of drafting and sending letters to select board and to others supporting the delay of implementation of a right whale speed limit in Nantucket Sound. Somebody make a motion that we should draft and send such a letter.
Second, that's fine. That's the
Yes.
motion.
Second.
And any discussion?
No.
Okay, call the question.
Call it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Any
opposed? Hearing none. Okay, that passes. So I'll do a very quick initial draft and circulate it for further, revisions by those who are interested. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Thank you,
guys.
Craig.
Appreciate it,
No,
Craig.
this is one of the, we've been seeking wider public communications because the benefit is we get more ideas. And so we appreciate your dialing in this morning.
Thank you.
Is a motion to adjourn in order?
Let me see. So, and we're going to change the date of the next meeting, in which case I think we've had all the public comments so that for the time being. So yes, it is.
So I'm so moved.
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
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 And see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.